Time for the package from China, so let's go. Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's awesome that you're tuning in. In today's video we're going to take a close look at the GB300, the 7 simulator 6000 plus, also known as the SUP plus. Yeah, they're ripping everything off, nothing to do with SUP, but that's actually how they call these things. Nevertheless, what are we getting with this? That's always the question. That's the reason I just wanted to make these reviews. And in the inside, it's going to be absolutely a very interesting overall configuration, because this thing is also very cheap. So this is the GB300, has 7 different emulators from the Famicom PC Engine. That is an interesting one, you don't see this very often. Famicom, Super Famicom, the Mega Drive, then the Game Boy Classic Color, and the advanced 6000 plus game support, 800 mAh battery, and a 5V when it comes to charging, just a normal, let's say, USB. And yeah, USB phone charger. The weird thing is they also call it a digital game system 3.0 inch super wide LCD, but absolutely complete BS. This is just a cheap LCD, no IPS whatsoever. They say it claims that it can be played on TV. That is what we're going to try out. Nevertheless, in here we're finding a lithium rechargeable battery that will give us 2.2 hours of gameplay. Okay, so when it comes to these, let's say, cheaper devices, there's always a very big gamble. So it seems also there's an option we can have one with a controller. I didn't find it. Nevertheless, we're just not going to be needing it at all. So the overall design is indeed slim and completely different than the previous models. So we have an USB-C for charging, an AV out. There is no HDMI out for the money. We're having the on-off switch over here, volume control, an SD card. But the SD cards, I can tell you, getting it out of this thing is a nightmare. It only comes with 8 GB, but that's maybe because you don't need a lot of space when it comes to these older games. So we're having a D-pad, the ABXY, but I have noticed that the D-pad feels quite nice, and the select start, and they are even rubberized. So at least they have like very nice rubber, let's say, select start, similar to the NES back in the day. So there is no speaker at the front, you will find it at the back, and we do have an L and R shoulder buttons. But what's kind of interesting when you're actually holding this thing, yeah, it's indeed very comfortable. You can just easily hit the back buttons, so they did an amazing job. Also when it comes to the form factor, just a micro switch underneath though. There's not a lot of travel, the speaker, and in here we will find the battery. So what's also an interesting, let's say, different thing they're doing, I think back in a couple of years ago, back in the day I almost wanted to say, yeah, it's already a couple of years ago, we have the BL5C, the old school Nokia battery they were using all of the time, but seems to be they're going to in different routes. And this is going to be the thing that we're getting in the inside. Let's check out how we can easily remove this. Yeah, indeed, how can we even remove this? We can't. Come on, there we go. It's very tight. And yeah, that's what we see that. Well, beautiful pink battery. But the weird thing is, there is no writing on it, no milliamps whatsoever. Man, that's really cheap. So it's similar to the 18650, and this is actually one of those lead-in ion batteries. You can just put it in there if you're having the right version. I can tell you it's very tight, so I'm not going to put it in. But this is a 4000 milliamp, so you can easily upgrade it, have like 4 hours of gameplay. So that's a good thing, and yeah, this is just a very cheap version, or it seems to be, because there's no even writing. There's a general problem with these things, but let's say they're not lying today, and they're actually giving us a 2000 milliamp and giving us around 2 hours of playtime. It's not a lot, because I've seen better overall performance of battery life. But let's do a quick overview of the menu and everything else. But let's put the screw back in. I'm not surprised that there was no toilet paper manual, by the way. Besides that, we're having a tiny jack cable for plugging in at the top, and we're having only old school signal out. Yeah, these signals are not going to be great. Also a very cheap cable and a very short Type-C connection. So when booting this thing up, you can already see that the display is very horrible, and it's going to be very difficult also to record. But the menu is quite interesting. The funky tune, we have seen it before, but let's say cheap dongles. So the overall controls of the menu is kind of interesting. So when pressing left and right, we can switch between the list up and down for a different game. And pressing the shoulder buttons will give you the different kind of platforms. And like the box said, we indeed have the platforms that we were saying. If you're going to be any further than that, here you can actually see we're having favorites and all kinds of cool things. So we're having the ROM folder. Actually, when you're going to be adding your own games, you can put them in there. We're having the favorite list, the history. We can search, and the search itself works quite nice. I'll give you a demonstration. So let's say we're going to be searching for Sonic. Another thing I've noticed that this thing is quite fast when actually putting in the names. Sometimes we have this annoying delay with these cheaper devices. Pressing enter. And here we have all of the Sonic based games. Of course, it's just searching for Sonic, not the Sonic games in general. But there is no indication what kind of platform it is. It does have, most of them have a screenshot, so you actually can see what you're actually going to have when it comes to booting up the system. System configuration, only having the language here. And here we can switch between all of the different emulators. But let's get into some gameplay and let's see how good is the overall emulation, because there we had a lot of problems in the past. Beside the horrible display they're using, and what's kind of interesting, that they're using quite, let's say, hard plastic. You can even still touch the display, but I'm quite surprised. Normally these things are very flexible, and if you just bump something in it, it automatically destroys your display. I want to also see if I can remove the screen protector over here, but you can just see that it is quite difficult to get this thing off. But let's do it, because it makes the recording so much better. Pressing select to start at the same time will give you a special menu where we can make a quick load and quick save for every single game. So every game will have a special slot. So the joystick also can be checked and configured. So there's quite a lot of things you can actually do out of the box with this device. But let's start with some Double Dragon and some NES. And I must say that I'm quite surprised with the overall audio quality. It sounds quite nice. So far, no weird thing going on when it comes to the overall emulation performance, because that can be an issue with these multi-cheap devices. The D-pad is very responsive, it feels quite nice, so also there they completely didn't mess it up this time. Normally they also mess up like a lot of things on these, so far so good. After all of these years they're starting to learn to make a machine. So when it comes to the button configuration, here you can just actually see that we're having a turbo button, and this is actually what it is when the overall emulation. So let's get into another thing. Here I'll show you that you can actually save. What I love about it is they have a tiny screenshot over here. So let's say we're going to be quitting. We're going to be choosing the game again. We need to select the start. Here you can see the loading. We're loaded, and there we go. Works like a charm. But let's take a close look at the PC Engine. I'm already surprised that it's on here on a cheap device like this. But when it comes to, let's say, the button configuration, it seems to be working just fine. And the same goes for the audio itself. Okay, next up let's play some Super NES, and the reason I'm really curious about this game, besides I can dream the overall soundtracks of these things, it's also how will the D-pad perform, because this is one of those, let's say, game systems that we have an indeed just a D-pad that works perfectly. But so far, no weird things going on. I don't really notice any screen tearing or some other audio issues. Everything seems to be working just fine. And again, the camera doesn't really do the display justice. You can just see that it is very difficult to record, but the colors and overall are not bad at all. Next up, some Mega Drive / Genesis. So one of the games they always messed up in the beginning was the Sonic the Hedgehog 3, where a lot of Sonic games were running great. Sonic 3 and Sonic 3 Knuckles were absolutely horrible, but so far so good. Another thing I just wanted to check out, how was the overall experience with the audio, because one of the things they always need to mess up is when it comes to the stereo sound. We're only having one speaker at the moment, and when you're hitting the rings, you can just actually hear that it doesn't sound like it's supposed to be. Now you hear like ting, with some, let's say, silence between them, and normally you just need to have the ring sound every single time you're grabbing one. That's one of those things that you completely mess up. Another thing, I'm pressing the turbo button. Okay, so the left trigger button has been mapped, or hasn't been mapped at all. This seems to be a turbo button or what? Oh, there we go. Next up, I just wanted to see the three-dimensional part. Here you just see that every bleep is coming on when it comes to these blue spheres, but the ring noise is still not like supposed to be. But so far so good when it comes to the overall emulation performance, and I'm really surprised by this. But let's take a quick look into the Game Boy part. So first off, let's the older Game Boy. So they automatically map this one to the turbo. Same goes for this one too. It's not like a super fast turbo going on. But so far so good. The audio quality is also nice. So that's absolutely great. So when it comes to the overall gameplay part, it's absolutely nice. And let's get into the Game Boy Color. Game Boy Color is another system we do see a lot on these cheaper devices sometimes. But also here, this runs just fine. We can make a quick load, quick save. If the system doesn't freeze up. Because it seems to be that this is actually happening sometimes. It's always like funny that it actually happens when I'm recording a video. But yeah. Okay, reset. This very quickly can be done by this. By turning it on and off. Okay, so next up let's get into the Game Boy Advance. But this is the part where they managed to mess it up a lot. So let's hear the music. You do see some screen tearing. Oh, I can hear some starters going on. So when it comes to the overall emulation of Game Boy Advance, it's not great. So we do find something that they completely mess up. You can just hear that the audio is looping. Yeah. And when it comes to the, I think when it comes to the display size, it will be slightly different than the original Game Boy, so it's also going to be squeezed a little bit. But this is just unplayable. You know, and that is always such an annoying thing with these Chinese products, where you're just getting into this positive mindset, or just this positive review, and a final system, they completely manage to mess this up. So we can try different kind of games, but it's not going to be any better. Nah. But when it fails on a certain emulator, I just wanted to check out a different game. And there's nothing better than an F-Zero, one of my favorite games to play. And also we can check out if everything has been mapped correctly when it comes to the shoulder buttons, and it is. But to my surprise, this particular game seems to be working just fine. So this is just in case of emulator and let's say a game actually being played through the emulator. It's still not perfect. I do hear a minor hiccup here and there, but it is absolutely way better playable than the Sonic game that we've tried. And also the shoulder buttons are very nice to basically press because of the micro switch underneath. Yeah, that's great. But again, it's still not perfect. And this is one of those missed opportunities they're creating so many times when it comes to these cheap devices. Absolutely just a really annoying thing. But how about the connection with the television? So you can just plug it in here. You don't need to do any setup. But as you can see, nothing works, simply because you need to get out of the game, get into the main menu, and then you need to be plugging it in. So that's what we're going to do, quitting the game, then plugging it back in. And it doesn't work. It does actually work, but we need to wait for quite a long time for basically switching. And if you want to go back, you just pull it out. And that's actually how it works. If you want to have a 4:3 aspect ratio, you need to do it on your television. The signal output itself, it's quite okay. Oh, there's actually a downside with these old EV8 cable thingies. If you be jiggling them around, you can see some distortion on the display itself. And if you wonder, can you make a quick load, quick save? Yeah, you can do it with every single system. But if you want to do it, let's say an in-game save, that doesn't work at all. Yeah, and that's a little bit of a downside to this. When it comes to the AV out, I must say that I did have a lot of problems with the overall as a connection, but if you're holding it in a steady position, it seems to be working just fine. There was no HDMI functionality. We only find it on more expensive devices nowadays, and not like 100 and more. I think you find them around like $50–70 nowadays. So yeah, and also with bad GBA emulation, this is not a great overall experience. But let's do a quick peek in the inside, because I just wanted to do a quick teardown here on the channel. Okay, so it's quite a lot of tension when it comes to the shells itself. There we go, need to be very careful. Yeah, what I was afraid of is that the speaker has been soldered into the main board. So what I can try is to lift it out. There we go. Oh man, they sanded off like the chips, so we don't know what is going on underneath. So there are not a lot of screws holding everything together. So in here we're finding the GB300 version 1.2. When it comes to the model, there's not a lot of information going on over here. So let's see what this chip they're using a Samsung chip for. I'm guessing this is for the storage capacity. Well, let's remove this tiny screw. That's the only thing that holds this in place. Now we can lift everything out of it. Ooh, that was kind of weird. Okay, so the screen can be replaced if you want to. So here you can just see when the machine and everything has been made, but not want to get any fingerproof or fingerprints on this thing. Next up, the rubberized, or the rubber on the inside is one big piece. But what is interesting that they're using not the translucent cheap stuff, and that can also be the reason why this feels so much better. So that's actually what we're having when it comes to all of the parts in the inside. Not too much to see, especially when it comes to the chip, so we don't know exactly what it is running on. But let's put it back together. So this is actually what we're getting when it comes to the GB300, the SUP Plus version. Yeah, when it comes to this particular product, I don't know what they actually think of it nowadays. Simply because when you're looking at the form factor, the thing that it can play, but the price, maybe not a bad deal. But the biggest problem I'm having that GBA doesn't run perfectly is absolutely missed opportunity. Because when it comes to all the other features, this thing has a lot of cool stuff to offer. Thank you all for watching. Consider subscribing, hit that little bell. Join me on the channel, and it will be great to see you in the next video.